Hello and welcome to the Wild Medicine Academy 5-Minuter Parts of a Flower. What we'll be looking at today is the different flower structure, form and function of flowers. Here are your takeaways for today. After this presentation, you'll be able to view the flower using a whorl approach and define and understand the function of the 4 distinct and separate parts of a typical flower. You'll also be able to differentiate between flowers based on this structure and use terms such as perfect and imperfect, male and female. I hope you enjoy this presentation. First up, we're going to have a chat about what the function of a flower is, because the function of flowers determines their form. Flowers can be described on many levels and for many reasons, but usually their structural definitions and descriptions are based on their whorl structure. And the whorl structure defines 4 distinct parts of a typical flower, and then whether or not a flower contains all of those parts determines how we describe it. Another way that we can describe flowers is based on how they grow. So if they grow in clusters or whether they grow solitarily. That's not what we're looking at today, but it is another way that flowers are described. So let's have a look at the function of flowers. Flowers are the reproductive organs of a plant. They mature to become the fruit. Once fertilized, the fruit develops the seeds, and the seeds then germinate to become a new plant. On the right-hand side, you have a typical flower structure. It may seem that a lot of flowers are very beautiful, but the flower is designed to be able to enable the best chances of reproduction to take place. And here is why. We're going to start with the outer whorl, which is called the calyx. The calyx is a ring of sepals, which are green, often green, leaf-like structures that surround the bud. You can see them quite clearly on the rose bloom over on the left-hand side. And if you go down to the bottom for the chickweed seed, you can actually see, or should I say chickweed fruit, you can see the calyx, which is a ring of sepals around the bottom of that as well. The calyx, therefore, is the outermost whorl and pretty difficult actually to see in this image here on the right-hand side, but it's simply behind the petals. It's composed of all of the sepals and it has a protective and surrounding role. Next up, we have the corolla, which is the second whorl. So we're coming in now towards the center of the flower. Usually the petals are bright and colorful, and their role is to attract and support pollinators. So they will attract the pollinators to come to the flower to fertilize it. And in many cases, they provide a landing pad of sorts for pollinators to land on. And in some cases, the colors of petals can be a really good indication to animals or the animal kingdom, insects, that a particular plant could be poisonous. So it sometimes can be there as a warning mechanism as well. In the image on the bottom left, you can see what's called a half flower. This is a flower that's been dissected all the way down the inside so that you can see the different parts and components. And you can see the petals there. We've got one large petal at the back, and when we talk about all the petals together, we're talking about the corolla. So now we know we've got the calyx, which is protective, we've got the corolla, which is drawing in the pollinators, but where are they going? Now, next up, we have what's known as the Andressium, which can be translated from the Greek as house of the male. So the Andressium is referring to all of the male parts within the flower. And the Andressium is comprised of many stamen. You can see an example of a stamen up here on the left, but the stamen is not just that bright purple pad that you can see there. The stamen is actually a long stalk called a filament, which is attached to the landing pad there, which is the anther. The role of the Andressium is to produce and release the sperm of the flower. So this is the pollen that we're talking about. If you go down to the image on the left-hand side, you can see some of these anthers and filaments. Remember, the filaments support the anther and hold it up nice and high. And if you go over to the image on the far right, you can see whorl number 3 there, the Andressium, a ring of stamen. The gynecium translates as the house of the female, and it includes all of the female parts combined. Each female part is called a pistil, and within the pistil, it is composed of various carpels. So usually there's the one pistil within a flower, but it could have many carpels, which means you could have multiple sections to the female part of the flower. Each carpel is composed of 3 different parts. If we look over at the image on the left, we have the ovary down the bottom, which is clearly holding the little seeds that are attached to a placenta running down the vertical center line. We then have a style, which is a tube that connects the stigma, which is held up nice and high, to the ovary. So the style has a connective role. The stigma is where the pollen is going to land. So the stigma is often very sticky, which might be the origins of that particular name. So if you come over to the right-hand side, you'll see that whorl number 4, the gynoecium, is buried deep inside the flower and surrounded and protected by all of the rest of the parts of the flower. Let's just have a different perspective on this now. So let's talk about flowers as being the organs of reproduction and therefore essential for survivability of a plant. So if we look at the whorl structure in terms of its function for survivability, what you'll notice here is that we start on the outside with a layer of protection, the fortress, if you like. We then have a layer of attraction, so pollinators can be attracted, but the innermost and sacred and treasured parts of the flower are still protected. We have the pollen produced and released in this 3rd layer in here, so we now have the sperm, and then finally we have the egg. So you can see there how the evolution of the flower has come about as a means of protecting the eggs so that they have time to develop and time for the flower to become fruit. So the key points today are that typical bisexual flowers contain 4 different whorls. From the outside, they are the Calyx, Corolla, Andressium, and Gynoecium. Flowers are divided into those which have all the whorls, which are known as perfect flowers. So they will have the male parts, the female parts, the calyx, and the corolla. However, that's not always the case, and sometimes you get flowers which just contain male parts. They're known as male flowers. So they might have the Andressium, corolla, and calyx, but no gynoecium. And then we have female flowers which may have the gynoecium, corolla, and calyx, but no male parts, no Andressium, and they're called female flowers. And that concludes our 5-minute presentation today. I hope that you've enjoyed this. If you need to cite this presentation, you have the links down here. Have a wonderful journey through botany. It's a fascinating subject. And don't forget to check out all of our webinars, courses, and 5-minuters on the wildmedicineacademy.com. Bye for now.